Damien Fearn, the co-founder of Tipstrr. Damien, thanks for coming on.
Before we get into this episode, make sure you follow us on Twitter, @bettingpod, and check out the website, businessofbetting.com. Guest suggestions are much appreciated. This podcast is proudly sponsored by Betfair Proprietary Limited. Betfair operates a betting exchange and is licensed in the Northern Territory of Australia. Residents of Australia can join Betfair by visiting betfair.com.au and support this podcast by using promo code BOBPOD. Please gamble responsibly. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy this episode of the Business of Betting podcast.
Today I'm joined by Damien Fearn, the co-founder of Tipstrr. Damien, thanks for coming on.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So Damien, take us through your start in betting and some of your background that led you to what you're doing today.
Okay, well, to be honest, I was quite late into the betting scene. It wasn't until I kind of finished university that I moved from performance analysis in sport. So that's kind of where I initially was. So I worked in professional football for a few years, learned all about the uses of data in professional sport, which was interesting. And then from there, I kind of went into sports betting after getting a job for a trading house based in London. And they kind of opened my eyes massively into how that data that I was using in professional sport kind of translates into the betting world. And it was, a real eye-opener. Very interesting. Seeing how they utilised that information and how they kind of, just used it for sports betting, something that I was kind of wasn't privy to until I got to that stage.
So take us back to your performance analysis work in sport.
My degree was in sports performance, and there was an opportunity to work for a club as kind of an apprentice, which was using, I don't know if you've heard of it, it's called Prozone.
Okay.
Which is kind of a video analysis tool that films the game, collates some of the data, and then you get to utilise that data, find trends, maybe the team's getting exposed down the left wing, or they can't hold the ball up front, and you kind of can utilise that and then relay that back to the coaches and then directly to the players as well.
Okay, interesting. So looking back now with all the experience you've had since then, how good are sports at using and utilising data to help them with their performance? Are they as bad as probably the average person on the couch thinks they are when they're, throwing things at the screen when they're not doing optimal things, or are they pretty comprehensive and advanced when it comes to utilising those types of things?
It's definitely on the up. I think that when I did it, which was kind of 2008, 2009, and then into 2010 as well, it was a bit naive. People were also very reluctant to treat the data as relevant or as important. So they'd quite frequently, especially the players themselves, some of the more old school players, they were reluctant to say, okay, this data could actually help me improve as a player. It was more, nah, I don't need this. I know what I'm doing. I'm the professional footballer, like not you. You can't. This data isn't of no use to me. But I think that's changing a lot now, especially kind of in the top tiers. So you've got kind of some of the bigger clubs have got huge teams of like highly skilled people that can really provide that edge. Every team is looking for that slight edge because it's so valuable to them. So the difference between a Champions League spot and not a Champions League spot, or getting promoted to the Premier League or not getting promoted to the Premier League, is millions. So they've seen the value in getting that little tiny edge, however small it is, and that they're utilising that and utilising the performance analysis teams.
What about from a betting perspective? Are there things that you learnt in that environment that were or are useful now? Because a lot of people talk about you don't even need to know the name of the players or the team. A lot of it's computerized and algorithmic. And then others rely heavily on that intimate knowledge of what's happening on the pitch or on the field.
I think the thing that I've found is certain players kind of not being available. It's less important than a lot of people will weight it. obviously there are some very important players in some teams that are critical to the team's performance, especially if they kind of focus their whole tactics around that player. But if a right back is missing and the slightly weaker right back comes in, it plays very little influence in the overall team performance, is one thing that I've found.
So how did you switch over from your time there to working in betting houses and with syndicates?
So when I was, I think it was the World Cup, the 2010 World Cup, and I was working at the Prozone head offices, providing some support because they were busy during the World Cup period. And I applied for a job kind of without really understanding what it was properly in London. And I got a call back while I was in the offices there. And I was kind of within 2 weeks, I started the job in London because they were trying to set up quickly. And yeah, basically with my experience it was the Championship and League One that I was working in. The role was Premier League analyst. So it kind of just went from Championship up to the Premier League. And yeah, very quickly I was chucked in the deep end there. And I was rating all the players, all the chances they created. And it kind of happened quickly. So from mid-July, I was in there preparing for the 2010-11 season.
Did they have a systematic task for you to analyze players or teams or whatever else you were doing, or was it you're the expert, you tell us?
It was incredibly structured. So they had a set way of doing things, and it was stick to that way. And basically, it feeds into their models, so it had to fit with what they did. It was really a big eye opener because the structure and the accuracy and their methods was impressive. It really was.
So do you know what their aim was? Were they trying to have an assessed price on a team, or were they what type of things were they using the data for ultimately?
So it's to get the prices, so the implied probability of all the different outcomes that you can get. But then a lot of what was done is kind of the in play stuff. So they would know, in theory, when there's an increased chance of a team scoring, based on the chances that they would typically create in a game, the chances that the other team would likely concede in the game, and then how likely they would then be to convert those type of chances. So it did go in quite a lot, and there were a few games where we know they did well because it kept flagging another goal as a bet, and then I think there was one game that had 10 goals in, and they kept expecting there to be another goal, which was it was really, really fun and really interesting to be involved in it.
Before you got there, did you think, or did you have a good understanding of what to expect, or were there a lot of things that surprised you throughout that process? I mean, I guess the whole will there be another goal scored type thing, maybe there was things throughout that process that you weren't expecting.
Yeah, I didn't. First, the biggest thing I didn't appreciate or understand when I took the job is kind of the scale of their ambition and kind of just the numbers that were involved. So kind of I never thought of betting much more than kind of £10 here, £20 there, which is, I suppose, indicative of the vast majority of the UK market. That's kind of as far as betting goes for a lot of people. But then kind of seeing the other end of the scale, it opened my eyes to the world of like professional sports betting, basically. Something that I kind of almost didn't believe existed, or maybe I'd not just given it much thought, but yeah.
Were a lot of the things you were calculating intuitive and logical, or were there some things where you thought, I don't know why they expect another goal here, but the data's saying that, and that's what's going to happen, and ultimately that's what's going to be bet? Not really.
It was, we didn't kind of get full access to the end product most of the time. So the data that was going in was intuitive from our perspective. So we had to give our own personal input. So kind of how good is this player? How bad is that player? How good is this chance? How bad is that chance? But a lot of it was kind of predetermined. So if it hit this criteria, you would rate it this. If it hit this criteria, you would rate it that. And that was kind of quite structured, quite organised. And I think that kind of helped to their success, is that they knew what formula worked. And then we kind of data entry experts to an extent, where we're just analysing what's happening and then putting that into the correct format for their model, which was complex, above my head anyway.
So there's a lot of intrigue and mystery around some of these syndicates, and is the confidentiality, or is it a fun lifestyle? Are you enjoying what you're doing and it's a fascinating experience, or is it data entry and a lot of data science that goes into making sure the inputs and ultimately what the outputs are to the person upstairs make sense?
Yeah, it was definitely fun, because it's the first time that I'd kind of moved down to London when I was doing it, and so that was a good experience. And they treat their staff really well, which is good. So it's kind of it's almost like a family. So they do a lot of things together. I know that they've grown massively since I started. When I started, there were 5 analysts, and now I think there's 100 or more. So it's it shows that there's legs in what they're doing. And yeah, so now instead of a family, I'm guessing it's more like a community where everyone's on the same page. But yeah, it's definitely an enjoyable thing. There's some monotony to it, but that happens with any job. When you start kind of repeating similar processes, there's a monotony. But at the end of the day, you get to watch every Premier League match every week, and that's not too bad of a job.
Were you allowed to bet at all during that process, or was it strictly a non-betting environment?
You can bet. There's nothing against that. I know that some things are tried to keep secret, but we like I said, when I was there, it was never a case of here's the model, here's the prices that we think it should be. Like, you go and bet what you want on that. But by spending 40, 50, 60 hours a week looking at the Premier League, you do get to build a solid understanding of where things are going, who's creating the best chances. So you kind of, a lot of the time it's about the true score rather than the actual score. So yeah, okay, Man United might have beat Chelsea 2-1, but Chelsea had 4 absolutely gilt-edged chances. So on any other day they'd have won. So kind of you can take that into the next game and say, well, Chelsea are creating really good chances. So you'd have that implied probability that they're more likely to convert chances this time round or whatever. So it worked quite well.
So do you think they're doing much the same right now in that room where you were? Do you think the process and the inputs and outputs are largely similar, or do you think it's evolved even in the last sort of handful of years a fair bit?
It will definitely have evolved. It always was. It's kind of like a fluid model that will kind of change as time changes. So it might be that I haven't got the data to hand, but maybe now there are, say, more clear-cut chances in the Premier League than there used to be. Maybe there are fewer, and that will then weight into their model.
How do most people get involved? Or I know you explained a little bit how you got involved, but the average punter on the street that might be interested in this space, is it a simple thing, or is it a rigorous process where they handpick exactly the type of personality and expertise that they need?
I think due to the nature of the job, almost anyone would love to have that kind of job, so they have the pick of whatever they want. So initially they focus purely on the experience within the industry or within performance analysis. So having that kind of experience was weighted highly. But I've since seen some of the requirements, and a lot of it is degree based, math based, logic based. But then also with a passion for sport as well. So a lot of people would still qualify to be going for those jobs, but a lot of it's based on experience as well. So
did you ever get the chance to take a peek into the betting side or the output of the model and how that is executed, or was it always very segmented?
It was segmented enough. I'd seen a bit on some of the platforms that they used to execute the bets, but I wasn't within the execution team, so I didn't kind of see it day to day.
Rethink the way you see sport. Every action or play can be represented by a series of numbers. When you analyse this data, patterns begin to emerge. If you follow these patterns and develop systems, you can play the game within the game. Betfair.com.au. Gamble responsibly.
So, what changed? What made you leave, or what was the impetus to move on from that experience and that lifestyle?
It was family, to be honest. So my now wife was based in the Midlands, so kind of moved back up because long distance is never fun. Yeah, and I got kind of a bit of a more regular job for a while, and kept the sports betting stuff on the side. So I managed to, with my experience in London, I managed to get connected to a few sports betting syndicates based in Asia and in Europe, and kind of worked remotely for those guys, which was also interesting and a lot of fun. Bit higher pressure, but it was good.
And was that doing a lot of the same stuff?
That was more, so it was to an extent, but it was also kind of providing, I became almost a tipster for them. So I was an expert, and I'd built a couple of models myself. They're only pretty primitive. There's nothing groundbreaking with them, but they helped guide me in the line of pricing, and then I could kind of evaluate whether I thought that price was true. So it was quite intuitive, and then I'll just provide my strongest selections to them, and then they would bet however they saw fit, basically.
Okay, and then next came Tipstrr, right?
Yeah. So I tried my hand as a tipster for a while on social media. Obviously, there are hundreds, thousands scattered around, and I always found that I could not perform with all the other social media tipsters. Like I think 5, 6, 7% ROI over maybe 12, 18 months, which is good, really good. But you've got people who could bodge their results without kind of throwing accusations out. There are a lot of people who would just shout about winners. There was no kind of verification process, no accountability whatsoever. And I decided, right, there needs to be something done about that, something that kind of provides that accountability to an industry that's got, or a part of the betting industry that's got a terrible reputation for scams, for people being ripped off, for people cheating, lying. And that's kind of how Tipstrr was formulated as an idea.
So take us through what Tipstrr offers, because obviously, trust is a massive component when it comes to paying a random person that you probably never met for tips. And a lot of people will talk about if you're a recreational bettor and you're buying tips, you're already behind the 8 ball to a large extent. So if you're buying them, you want to make sure that it's something worth buying.
Yeah, so our platform basically we've got an external data feed that comes in with the current odds. So when a tipster wants to add a tip to share with their members, they don't get to choose the odds. The odds are there ready for them, so they can't manipulate the odds. They choose their stake. It's all then time stamped, which means obviously that they can't retrospectively say, oh yeah, I knew Man United would win 1-0. And look, they did win 1-0, but you've done it after the event. So it kind of has that verification aspect of it. They can't remove a tip after. So the one thing that I saw happen a lot on social media in the early days was people post 5 tips, but then the next day they say, oh, they've won 3 and lost 1. And one tip's magically vanished from the record. So it's just something that we wanted to eradicate.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So what have you learnt from all the different tipsters that are posting their different plays? Is there a handful of trends that pop up? What's the percentages of those that actually are winning or able to win over a number of seasons? Are there any things you can share with us?
So trying to think of some of the things that we've got in terms of a bigger data. So we processed, I think, near enough 1.3 million tips so far. So kind of we're getting a lot of information. The users that tend to be most popular. So we do horse racing and football are our 2 main sports at the minute. So the most popular services for horse racing, for instance, add their tips on the day of the racing in the morning. So kind of they're most popular because people can get the prices most easily. because they've settled. They can. A lot of our punters, our members, have got restrictions on accounts, limited accounts, so they'll resort to Betfair or to the other exchanges. And for tipsters that add tips in the morning, they know that they can get a lot closer to the price even on the exchange, which is obviously important. And from a football perspective, the trends seem to be the popular leagues are the most well followed for members. People want Premier League tips, they want Bundesliga tips, they want the tips from the main leagues. But obviously, with the markets having more liquidity there's a benefit, but there's also the fact that the prices are going to be a lot more accurate and harder to profit from. So anyone that does profit from those kind of leagues are popular services.
Have you seen any tipsters or a number of tipsters consistently win or consistently, beat the closing price or anything like that? Or is it really a difficult game to be posting tips online if you're ultimately winning?
We've got quite a few that are consistently profitable over a long period. There are a lot that have big swings, ups and downs, which is obviously inevitable. Can't win all of them, but there's no real formula that we know has worked for everybody. But there are plenty of tipsters that can beat the closing line regularly in football. We're actually looking at implementing a metric that will monitor that. So we do get the closing price. So we're looking to add a marker on each tipster that says the percentage of time they beat the closing price. So we think, based on customer feedback, they'd love that as something to look at. So if they know that there's a small ROI, but they're beating the closing line 70% of the time, then that's a tipster well worth following.
So can you find the bad tipsters pretty easily, or does it still even take time because they might win for a period of time or hover around break even?
Yeah, you tend to see some trends. So a lot of people like the correct score market, and I don't personally, but you can see sometimes they'll get 3 or 4 correct scores in a week, fly up our kind of leaderboards, because it's hard to eradicate that, because people do like it. People do enjoy the thrill of kind of backing an outsider, backing a correct score. But we tend not to give too much focus on any tipster that's not had at least 3 months on our site. Whether they've been anywhere before is kind of not relevant. So we're looking at tipsters that have at least 3 months record on our site before we start analysing whether they're good or bad. And then we've got a Slack group where we will have our tipsters and speak to them one-on-one to try and get an understanding of how they work, how they behave, what kind of edge they have, to understand their experiences, maybe how they get to their selections, whether they create a price themselves or whether they're going on intuition or trends or form or whatever. But we found that a really useful way of kind of seeing who's legit, who's got an edge, and who really understands what they're doing, and then who's just throwing darts. So
that is interesting. The person that has been a social media tipster, let's say, wants to come over to Tipster, what incentivizes them to do that? Or even just someone who's not a tipster and might be, winning 5, 6, 8% ROI like yourself or others. What incentivizes either of those groups to come over and put their plays on your platform?
We think that the pages that they get are kind of really quite good. They have stats, they have itemized results, stats based on league, based on bet type. So it's something that would take a lot of time to build yourself, say in a Google Drive document, or build your own website or whatever it was. It's a lot of upkeep, a lot of effort to do, whereas ours is automatic. So that's the biggest benefit, is you can just track your results. You get a nice graph that shows whether you're profitable, whether you're not. It can even help educate your own personal betting. So if you're adding your personal bets there and you see that your over-under bets have got, negative 12% ROI, but everything else is +7, you can say, I'm doing something wrong in that betting market. So it can help you learn and become a more profitable sports bettor as well.
And are those tools transferable and available for just the general punters as well, not just the tipsters?
Yeah, and look, it would, in essence, they're the same thing, but you can use them for any general punter can come onto our site and track their bets. Yeah, that's we're not kind of restrictive. You don't have to be a tipster. You don't have to sell tips. You don't have to do anything like that if you don't want to. But if you're just a regular bettor and you've got an 8% ROI, if you want to, then there's definitely a market there for people who would love to be able to follow an 8% ROI football sports tipster.
So what's next for Tipstrr and you guys? What are you building and developing? Where do you want to see it head? What are some of the important things on your roadmap?
There's a couple of things that we're looking at, and one of them I've mentioned already, which is the beating the start price. So a metric that allows you to know how often you are beating the start price, potentially by league, by market, to give again to improve that insight that you're getting. So you can learn a lot from how you bet yourself. So having that will be good. And then we're also, from a horse racing perspective, we want to implement the ability to see who's profitable to Betfair start price, because anyone that can do that is instantly really valuable to follow, because you can just go onto Betfair, get the start price, and just there you go. You know that you can be profitable to that. You don't have to worry about whether your Ladbrokes account is going to be limited, whether your Bet365 account no longer got best odds guaranteed. You're looking at the very baseline profit, and if you can make a profit there, then you're going to be able to follow it.
So let's talk a bit more generally about the tipping industry, and I guess how do we add more accountability? We have a lot of social media tipsters, and for some reason they have a big following, or for some reason a lot of people will buy packages from them and will want to have access to their tips, and a lot of the time it's pretty easy to see. Even just a general punter can probably tell they might be a potential scam artist down the road. What things have you seen change, or what can we do to help with that accountability?
One thing that I think always helps, maybe not initially, but it is the fact that the sports betting community on social media, they team up, they work together. So if someone says, "Oh, this package sounds interesting, I want more info," as a reply to a tweet, if it's a dodgy service, you'll quite often get someone say, "Absolutely, don't join this. Send me a message if you want an explanation," or they'll just explain it there. And I think that's really good, is that kind of the sports bettors are looking out for each other.
Do you think the general tipping industry has got better or worse as it's evolved over the last handful of years you've been deeply involved, or do you think that it's still got a long way to go, and as more social media becomes relevant and a lot of people are active on many different platforms now, it's going to be harder to track and verify a lot of this stuff?
It's it's still got a long way to go. You kind of, in a nutshell, like what you said then, yeah, it's got a long way to go. I feel like it's improved. I feel like people are becoming increasingly aware of the need for that accountability, for that transparency. I see it on social media a lot, where people shout about their amazing results, and you have 3, 4, 5 replies of, "Oh, have you got is it verified? Have you got a tracked history?" And any that don't kind of are starting to struggle, or it seems that they're starting to struggle, because they can't get people to join the service because they've got no accountability themselves. Just, we've got a 20% ROI, and they expect people to just believe that and join based on that. And I think that people are growing wise to it, basically.
So what do you tell your best friend or your brother or sister who says, "I want to pay $100 for this Tipster package over the World Cup"? What are some of the things you would urge them to consider before they pay the money?
The first and foremost thing is it going to be worth it? So I'll talk about their personal betting. So, right, if they're going to make a 10% ROI, if you're betting £3 a bet, then it's not worth it. So weigh up the cost of the membership to your realistic expectations of profit. So if you think that might make you $500, then okay, that could be a worthwhile investment. If it's going to make you 120, potentially, then no, you're not going to be interested. And then it'll be looking into that service specifically. Why will their World Cup package be better than any other package? Why will it be better than random, like just betting yourself? If they've got a legitimate understanding of what that tipster has to offer, that their insight's good, that their content and their analysis is good. Sometimes it's worth paying for the content alone. If they're providing a 500-word preview for every World Cup match, then that could be worth the $100 purely because it might just point you in the right direction for a few bets that help you justify that membership.
So how does one get involved, or what's the best way for them to play around, on Tipstrr and utilize some of the tools and features that you have?
Simply to register. On the registration process, it'll give you options on what you want to do. So do you want to start adding your own tips, track your own bets, follow some tipsters? You just choose that, and then we'll try and guide you to the right area. And yeah, you can have a play around. It's full access, so you can access absolutely everything yourself just by registering. You can then, if you want to sell picks, then there's an area for you just to change your bet tracker into a premium service. If you've been doing it for a few months, you'll already have that history there, so you get to kind of try it out before you decide what you're going to do with it.
Awesome. Before I let you go, Damien, what's the best way if someone wants to contact you or ask a question or even just follow you on Twitter? What's the best contact method for you?
Well, Damien at tipster.com is to get to me directly. We've got a support team, so support at Tipstrr. If you've got any questions that you think that anyone would be interested in answering, anyone in our team could answer. Or follow us on Twitter, which is at Tipstrr. It's TOPSTRR. And yeah, that's the easiest way to drop us a message. That's monitored most of the time, UK hours. And yeah, we'll be happy to answer any questions if anyone's got any.
Awesome. Damien, I very much appreciate your time. It's a very interesting space that doesn't get a lot of coverage, and a lot of the time it's negative. So it's very fun to chat with you about some of the things in this industry. So I wish you certainly all the best, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Cheers. It's been a pleasure.